And welcome on in, everybody. Another edition here of the Auburn Undercover podcast on the 24/7 Sports Network. My name is Nathan King. I am joined today by Jason Caldwell. Jason, we are now through 9 days of Auburn fall camp, and as Payton Thorne so perfectly put it yesterday, soon they will, quote, unfortunately start school, he said, which is an understandable perspective from a sixth-year senior getting ready for his final college semesters. But they'll have 4 more days of camp this week, as I understand it. As we record this here on Tuesday morning. And then obviously school starts Monday, practice gets changed around a little bit, and then it's just 2 weeks until game week. I mean, it already is 2 weeks until game week, Jason. And so the team had their first scrimmage on Saturday, and so wanted to kind of talk about the trends from that, the trends we've been kind of seeing from position groups across the roster as they're about to start trimming down practice reps. If you guys are watching this live on YouTube and Facebook, feel free to jump in with any comments that you have, any questions about the team so far. So, Jason, before we get into guys on both sides of the ball that have sort of stood out to us so far in fall camp, we mentioned this a little bit on Saturday, but talking to players yesterday about the scrimmage, I thought Payton Thorne was able to give some good context to what they were working on. I hate that we're right all the time, but it sort of validated what we were talking about afterwards. I mean, it really was more of a practice a lot of the time. Payton Thorne said that they were putting in new plays like in the middle of the quote scrimmage. And so as we talked about after things were done in the stadium, if that was a real game setting, you would have seen a lot quicker passes. You would have seen a lot more RPO. And I don't know if you noticed this. I mean, maybe it was just my eye, but it seemed like a lot of it was a lot of like drop back stuff, like drop back, run routes, and look for receivers. We know that's not what this offense, that's not what their base scheme is going to look like this season. But look, Payton Thorne admitted it. He said, look, we were frustrated coming off the field. We as an offense don't want to look like that. But at the same time, they understand that kind of what the nature of that scrimmage was. While on the other side, the defense, they had a great day. But look, that's a group that said, look, we wanted to force more turnovers. I think they had 2 on the day, and DJ Durkin has sort of instilled in them so far to not necessarily be satisfied with that.
Yeah, no, it's, going into it, we did not expect the offense to go out there and show a bunch of stuff. First of all, there are people in the stands, and we know how coaches are, especially offensive coaches, and the less they can show in those situations, the better that they feel. And so that was absolutely the case on Saturday. And would you like to take advantage of some opportunities? Absolutely. But you're still working on timing, and timing in a practice setting is one thing. Timing when you're in even a thud setting where you're, one-on-one quarterbacks, you're rushing the passer, all those things, it changes everything. And that's why it's important to get some of those opportunities. And that was the first one. Defensively, hey, just run and cut loose. That's the timing issue on defense. And so it does take a little bit of time. You can do all the things you want to in practice and in the summer and all that stuff, but there's no replication for getting out there. And that's why you'll see a couple more of those situations. And there may not be full-blown scrimmages later, but you'll still have team periods where you're doing thud, where you're rushing a quarterback, where all those things that continue to add up on offense. But yeah, so hey, I've been doing this long enough to know, going back to Coach Shai and everybody in between. And you'll hear coaches say it all the time. If the defense isn't ahead in the first scrimmage, you're in trouble, because the offense is one that takes a little more time to start to kind of find its rhythm. It's exactly what I expected on Saturday. Had Auburn gone out and scored on about 7 straight possessions, you would have seen a whole lot of coaches scared to death after that. That wasn't the case. Do you want to execute and do the things a little bit better? Yeah, but overall, it was about what I expected to see on Saturday. And they'll continue to add more on offense and start to fine-tune things as they head towards the season. But there'll be another one of those scrimmage situations. And my guess is it'll be a lot more, too, as we start to focus more on what that backup quarterback spot's going to look like.
Yeah, I mean, and that's not to say the offense didn't have some explosion here and there. It was the backup groups, it was second and third team groups with those quarterbacks and those receivers. Malcolm Simmons had a couple touchdowns. Bryce Kane had a touchdown. I'd forgotten until I was talking to somebody about it. You're not going to have replay in a situation like that, but Perry Thompson was pretty close to coming down with that one in the back of the end zone. That definitely would have gone to that definitely would have gone to the replay booth in a game. But we saw that more out of the backup groups just because, and this is nothing against the guys they have there on defense, but I think particularly not in the front line when you're not running the ball, when you're not dropping back for a long period of time. Like they've got those dudes on defense. But when you're talking about third team secondary, tough to keep up with Malcolm Simmons. Like you're talking about third and fourth team cornerbacks. It's tough to defend Perry Thompson on the outside. And so we knew those guys were going to have an opportunity to flourish. But it was interesting, Jason, getting to talk to Payton Thorne about those guys yesterday, his impressions of them. And he sort of reiterated what we had already talked about. He said, look, we have 4 freshman receivers who can play. That's rare. Again, it seems unlikely this day and age any of these guys are going to redshirt. Like, yeah, I think, and you've mentioned it a couple times, I think, on the show this preseason, like if they can help you for a few plays a game, there is no point not to have them do that, not to have them part of the game plan. I think Saturday sort of confirmed.
Correct.
Hey, Bryce Cain and Malcolm Simmons, they can help you a few plays a game. Even if it's just 3 or 4, they can absolutely help you. Even once SEC play rolls around.
Yeah, there's no chance that any of those freshman wide receivers redshirt unless there's an injury somewhere down the line. They're all going to play, and they're going to play a role. And I think you can start running down the list of freshmen, and you go, okay, which one of those guys? And that's the fun part of this is that the early returns for the class they just brought in are really, really good. You look at quarterback, and you go Walker White and go, that may be the one where you still go. It may be tough depending on what happens with this quarterback battle in the next couple of weeks. That might be tough because it's hard to get if he's not the second guy, it's hard to get a third guy really involved. But you start looking elsewhere, wide receiver, I think all those guys are going to play. You think about DeAndre Carter, that might be another one, but he saw some reps with the twos the other day as quickly as that's been. Defensively, we see all those guys. If not special teams, guys in a rotation. Here's what we know. Malik Blockton is going to be in the rotation. He was with the first group when they did some dime package stuff as a pass rusher. He was on the field. You got TJ Lindsey. That guy's there. But Amaris Williams and the linebacker group, the edge guys, secondary, we may see all these guys on the field. So there may only be 1 or 2 redshirt guys by the time this is over with. And you're right. If a guy can help you, you better play him. And so I think that's what we're going to see.
I mean, Malik Blockton he was somebody you put in our camp notes yesterday. We talked about him after the scrimmage. It's not a gimmick. It's not a fluke. Remember, he's been there since the bowl game. Like that matters. He has not just had 15 spring practices and now 9 fall practices. He has had X amount of Music City
5 or 6 bowl practices for him, 15 spring, and now so he's got
30
more than 30 practices under his belt. That's a big deal.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, really interesting to watch Durkin's. I enjoyed kind of watching their defense. Not even what happened after the ball was snapped. Just interesting to see the rotations. Interesting to see the different lineups they're playing with right now. You mentioned that dime package. When they went 3 down on defense, you had Malik Blockton and Keldrick Falk in there as your ends, and big Isaiah Rakes in the middle. We talked to a couple defensive linemen yesterday. Jason, Isaiah Rakes, and Gage Keys were both really insightful to talk to. Gage Keys in particular was a really good conversation. And I don't remember the exact quote from Gage Keys, but they're like, look, man, these coaches have been telling us all offseason that's what we're going to do. We saw it on Saturday. They are literally going to rotate as often as possible with the understanding that you better go in there and play like crazy. And we've seen it from Vontrell King-Williams, even just in practice, in the way their habits have been. If they do not operate that way, they are going to be really upset with these players. If they do not go in there and play with their hair on fire, because even for a guy like Isaiah Rakes, who's 320 pounds, like if your workload is lowered a little bit, you're going to be expected to go in there and be in good shape and produce at a high level. And so as we get closer to the season, it's very clear the game plan we thought they'd have all off season for this defensive line is what they're going to end up rolling with.
Yeah, you're talking about like 3 or 4 plays at a time. That's what we saw. Sometimes it was one or two, depending on what the offensive, their guys they're subbing new defensive linemen in for different packages they have. That's the thing that jumped out to me. We've heard rotation. Rotation's one thing, but we saw a lot of different looks out of that defensive front. And that's been the thing, versatility. We talked to Gage Keys about, we talked to these guys, the versatility of the group because of Keldrick Fault. Because Keldrick Fault's a guy that can play defensive end. You can also slide him inside defensive tackle. Now we've seen Malik Blockton go, hey, guy can play defensive end some, maybe in a three-man front, and you get some different looks. We saw two buck guys on the field at the same time. We saw two end guys on the field at the same time. You had a Morris on the field and Keldrick at time. There's a lot of different possibilities for this group, and obviously they can go big if you're facing a team that maybe it's Arkansas this year with Bobby Petrino, and they've got a fullback on the field. You might see Rakes and Jason Jones on the field, or Rakes and Bleedy on the field at the same time with Keldrick. And then maybe you put a Morris Williams and don't have a true edge on first down. They do have some options. And we've seen some guys start to play. We saw, Bobby Jameson Travis make some plays Saturday. There are a lot of bodies, and that is going to be the strength of this group. Can Keldrick step up and become a dominant player? That's the hope. But I think we're going to see a lot of guys, hey, be fresh at the end of the first half, be fresh at the end of the fourth quarter. I think that will be maybe the defining part of this front four, especially.
Saw that a couple times on Saturday. I remember they went early down stuff, and you had Rakes and Jason Jones together. And Rakes talked about it yesterday. He said, "I know I'm big, but I've played a little three tech. He was not just shoehorned as a nose tackle." I want to talk about Rakes for just a second. I really enjoyed having a conversation. Boulder wants to be part of the podcast. I really enjoyed having a conversation with him yesterday. Such an interesting 4 months for him. Texas A&M. I hope he was able to break his Los Angeles lease pretty easily because he was there for 3 months at USC. And Jason, he kind of admitted it. His reasoning for leaving USC was basically because he wanted to come to Auburn. And that made sense when he said, this playbook under Durkin is exactly the same as it was at A&M. And I said, yeah, how easy was it to pick up on it? I asked him, and he said, it's exactly the same. I was like, exactly the same? Exactly the same. So he knew everything that was going on day one of fall camp. And I think he was a guy a lot of people pointed to. And there are other defensive linemen, newcomers that could continue to develop well. And I think Bleedy and Gage Keys, they're all going to be good. Rakes has risen to the top of that nose group, I think. And the fact that, you're implementing a new defense and he wasn't even here for the summer and was still able to keep up with all that a bunch of install that they did. They talked about yesterday, they did a ton of install this summer. I've just been impressed with Rakes so far this preseason. And I think he's got an opportunity to be, like Rees said, he has the potential to kind of be that game-changing guy on the interior.
And I think having a guy like that, having a guy like Austin Keys, having guys that are familiar with his defense and the scheme and can be really beneficial for the little things, and we've heard, it's shown up heard how much mental work that's been done this summer to get these guys ready. And that DJ Durkin is a stickler for meetings and getting guys to the mental side of the game. That's the only way you can play fast. And we've heard, though, this defense is one that Rees said, hey, one of the reasons he hired DJ Durkin is because of the simplicity of the scheme. But simplicity does not mean basic. The simplicity of the scheme is the learning, but part of that comes by the work they put in, and it is not basic. It may be simple in terms of the scheme itself, but it is far from basic, as we saw Saturday. So I think having guys that have played in that before is really beneficial, and I think it's going to be really fun to watch. I think we're going to see, we've been seeing, I guess, the last couple of years, probably the number of guys that play significant snaps on defense has probably been around 20, low 20s that you'd say, hey, that's significant snaps. My guess is it will be closer to 30 guys that will see significant snaps on defense throughout the season as part of a regular rotation. That's a lot of guys, but I think that's where I think it's going to be when you think about 10 to 12 guys on the front four alone. You think about 5, 6 linebackers, and then you're talking about maybe 10 or 12 guys in the secondary. We're going to see some guys to go out there and get some play, which will be important in 2024, but it's going to be really important in 2025 and 26 because there's going to be some young guys that get prepared this season to take on bigger roles next year.
Yeah, I mean, talking to Thorne yesterday, I mean, we've heard a lot about the energy of this defense and just the kind of style that Durkin has. He was talking about the scrimmage and said if they don't celebrate after a defensive play, it's considered a loaf. It's considered a missed assignment. Like they want them to do that at the end of every play, and that's part of keeping this energy up over the course of 60 minutes. Jason, we'll jump into a couple questions here. As I said at the beginning, if you guys have any questions, definitely drop them in. Daniel asks, has Payton improved from last year, and who is most likely QB2? I think the Payton Thorne improvement in 2024, Jason, I think comes more from what he's got going on around him. He talked about it yesterday at length, that this is a very different offense, even though Rees is still there, even though it's still an RPO scheme. He could not talk enough about how different the scheme is and how different the system is. And then it's the wide receivers. I don't know how, sure, can Payton Thorne work on things as a passer and things within the offense? Absolutely. I don't know how much better of a quarterback he is going to be individually, but I think a lot of his parts of his game, they're hoping are going to open up this season because
of the guys around him. Yeah, I don't think that Payton Thorne is going to turn into Joe Burrow 2018, 2019, where you throw for 45 touchdowns and 4,000 yards, because that's not what this offense is designed to be anyway. Can he get to what he did at Michigan State? That'd be great if he did. Low 20s touchdowns, 3,000 yards.
Even just like a diet version of that.
Yeah, would be correct. I mean, because you're not asking him to do more. A lot of it's going to depend on, making plays a wide receiver. Can you get some help on some of those 50-50 balls? Not so many drops. If you just do those things alone, then he's a guy that completes 65% of his passes, probably another 500 yards last year, a couple more touchdowns, maybe a couple of less interceptions because you're not a 3rd and 15. You've already converted a first down. And so you do those things. Yeah, I think that's very possible. And I kind of liken it to Brock Purdy a little bit. If you put Brock Purdy on the New York Jets, he's not in contention to be an NFL MVP because he is perfectly where he is. He's a good quarterback, but because of the weapons around him, because you can run the football, it allows him to do those things. That's where I think about the potential for this offense this year. Payton Thorne can run. He can do some things with his legs. He's going to make some throws. Is he a guy that's going to go back there and throw it 45 times and have a 500-yard passing game? No, I don't think that's him, but I don't think he has to be either. And so, I think he's improved because it's comfort, because he knows this system inside and out, because this is what he grew up doing. I think that allows him to play better because of every part of this game.
Yeah, I mean, he talked about it yesterday. It's something you have used some combination of this phrase for years. He said, when you have guys now who can turn a 5-yard pass into a 20-yard gain, that makes a huge difference. He was referencing somebody like Malcolm Simmons and Perry Thompson, kind of their tackle breaking on Saturday. But he said, look, it just looks like we have more of those guys.
It's completely different. I mean, and I go back to Mac Jones. I mean, Mac Jones is okay quarterback. Mac Jones had an unbelievable, one of the best years we've ever seen at Alabama because he had a bunch of really good players around him. I'm not saying Auburn's got 4 first-round wide receivers now. Could down the road, who knows? But is more talented than any group we've seen in a while now. Can they go out and perform that way when you get in game situations? And can they do those things? But that's why you have Robert Lewis and Sam Jackson and bring in Keandre Lambert-Smith, some veterans to kind of, you don't have to play 4 freshmen 75 snaps and throw them into Cam Coleman. Will play a bunch, but he also went through the spring. But I think you're going to see these guys continue to get more and more involved because athletically, they're much better than anything Auburn's had in quite a while. And as you grow, you hope those guys become more consistent. They bring those things to the table. And you're right. Just think, two plays a game where it's a 5-yard route and a guy breaks it for 25, 30 yards. That's the difference in winning and losing. And you have that ability now.
The other question from Danny here is, who is most likely QB2? That has turned into a pretty good question. It was thought pretty closely contested between those guys on Saturday, Jason, and that's a hugely important position for them to figure out this season.
Yeah, we saw the rotation strictly Hank Brown, Holden Geriner Saturday with the twos. Those two guys went back and forth through the reps. Hank Brown was first out. My guess is the next time they have a scrimmage, Holden Geriner would be first out, and then Hank Brown would get the next ones. It sure feels like it's one of those two guys because of the experience, because they've been around a little bit. Walker White continues to develop, and he threw some really good balls Saturday, but I feel it's got to slow down a little bit more for him. But I don't know. I think we'll start to have some separation now that you've got some things on film. And my guess is that after this week that we will learn a lot more about who potentially that number 2 guy is going to be.
Yeah, it's so interesting to watch them because they are, even though they look kind of similar, like physically, they are such different quarterbacks, those two guys. And Hank Brown, look, to his credit, like he got the offense humming a little bit on Saturday. He opened them up because he's just fearless. And we saw that in the bowl. Like he's just going to let it fly. I think Holden Geriner, on the other hand, like has been in college longer, maybe has a better understanding of the offense. Like he's going to be more precise, probably throws a better ball. So been really interesting to watch them compete so far. I think, again, that's such an important position for them to figure out this season. I mean, something happens to Payton Thorne, you have to be confident. You know, Ken Austin and Derek Nix and Hugh Freeze have to be confident with whoever that backup is. Jason, kind of round things out, talking about the guys we were able to chat with yesterday. I'll let you talk about K'Ron Crawford and the potential for these pass rushers to be a little bit better, because I wasn't over there talking to him, but everybody who was really enjoyed their conversation yesterday with the Arkansas State transfer. And I think when you look at the fact that I was talking this on radio yesterday, this room is still about 3 deep, probably. I mean, Joe Phillips could help out, but like your 3 deep goes from Jalen McLeod, Elijah McAllister, Steven Sings. No disrespect to either of those two guys, but their talent level was not as high.
Yeah.
To Jalen McLeod, K'Ron Crawford, and like top 70 recruit Jamonte Waller. I just think there's potential for them to be an improved group this season. So I think Crawford, talk about kind of what he touched on yesterday, because he was a guy that popped right away as soon as they started preseason camp.
Yeah, and here's the thing. There's no questioning the athleticism of K'Ron Crawford. I mean, he was a former basketball guy, big, quick twitch guy. The question you always have when you have that transition, he's only 3 years removed from being a full-time basketball guy. He didn't really play football to his senior year of high school at Briarcrest in Memphis. And so from that point forward, it's been football, because he saw, hey, he had Iowa, Nebraska, some others come after him. In the end, I think they were concerned, hey, he just hadn't played much football, went up at Arkansas State, kind of got his feet wet in year one last year, explodes on the scene. You look, and he is the type of guy that you look up in a couple of years and he's playing in the NFL, and because of the athletic ability, the background. The question you have is physical side of things. Can he be physical enough to take on the run, to hold up throughout an entire season in the Southeastern Conference? That's where the depth comes in. He doesn't have to play 65 plays a game. Jalen McLeod, those guys can work off each other. So I think it's a huge addition, and he is a confident guy. There's no question about that. He believes he's fixed to come in and make an impact on this defense, and that's when they brought him in. Jamonte Waller is just a guy that knows how to play football. 6 foot, 250, very different kinds of guys. So, Jalen McLeod is the speed rusher, not the biggest guy, but a guy that, hey, let's just turn the corner. And then you look at K'Ron Crawford, he's built and looks like Rivaldo Fairweather. When you look at him physically, he broad-shouldered, 6'4", 250, a guy that looks like he could play about 4 different positions. And then Jamonte Waller is, to me, old school. And I went back to my living in Florida days in the 1990s, thinking about who does he remind me of, and I went back to a guy like Elvis Dumervil, who killed it at Louisville in the NFL, had a bunch of sacks, but he was 5'11", but he was so quick, so explosive, and could turn the corner and get under guys. That's what I think about Jamonte Waller. That's why I think he's going to play. And then you mentioned Joe Phillips. Joe's just big, physical, raw, but I've seen and hearing Josh Aldridge talk to him during camp, you see a guy that it reminds me a little bit of J.C. Hart. J.C. Hart was at Lochapoka, athletically through the roof, had to learn the finer points of playing at this level. Joe Phillips comes from Booker T, in Tuskegee, excuse me, and played defensive end, played tight end, played all these places. The difference for him is that he would work with Willie Whitehead, former Auburn player, on some of those pass rush moves. Now you come in and go through the spring. I'm starting to see him take a few of those steps here. If that's the case, I think he helps his team some as the fourth guy. And you can play four. You get in the second half of games, maybe early on especially, you get a little bit of a lead. Turn them loose. Let them go get some reps against, maybe a team that you got a chance to play some guys. It's a really intriguing position, and it's a group that has a chance to do some really good things as those young guys continue to develop. And I count Keyron Crawford in that just because he just hasn't played a ton of football. Yeah,
there was some Durkin his pass rush acumen is probably one of the better parts of his career. There was some statistic, I can't remember where it came from, but like the last 2 years at A&M were the most sacks for that program in a 2-year period ever. So just quietly kind of flew under the radar, but they had a good pass rush there. And now he's got some pieces to mess around with and see where they can go with that. Jason, we're now going to turn it over to kind of a recruiting angle here. So you and Christian can touch on what's been going on there. Obviously, people are a little anxious for a certain quarterback decision. Maybe y'all can talk about that as well, but we'll get back on here, later this week, maybe sometime next week to talk about how camp is progressing. So I will tap Christian in here, and Christian, I'll kind of let you ride and swap out with you and move backstage so y'all can cover recruiting. As I mentioned, YouTube, Facebook, y'all still tuned in. Y'all be sure to tap in with any recruiting questions you've got for Christian and Jason.
Yeah. Well, Jason, we can actually start off because I'm talking with a target right now through text. Shai Mills Knight. He's going to announce his commitment on this Saturday, August 17th. So while I'm sure everyone wants to know about Deuce Knight, know about all these other guys, that's probably where we should start because that's the news that's happening right now. Obviously, you've kind of gone back and forth with Shai Mills Knight, Usman Kroma, both bigger bodied running backs, kind of complements a little bit to Alvin Henderson, though Alvin is a little bit bigger than people probably give him credit for.
Correct.
And the intel that I had gotten recently in the past couple of weeks is that we thought they were right next to each other, and they're really close. I think Auburn prefers Shai Mills Knight just a tiny bit more than Usman Kroma. Now that's not to say Auburn doesn't want Usman Kroma.
Yeah.
And Ole Miss is the favorite right now for Shai Mills Knight going into Saturday, but Auburn's going to make this one interesting going into Saturday, and he'd be a really good pairing if you could get him.
Yeah, you're right. Big physical back, but he's a guy that can stretch it out, big play, can really run, and yeah, it is interesting to see what the second running back, because they definitely want a second guy in this class when you think about the running back numbers they have currently, and he is a bigger body, and so yeah, how much can you push? You're right. Ole Miss has felt like the team for quite a while, but this is an Auburn group that has built a lot of momentum. And I'm talking about the class itself, not necessarily just the coaches, but the players themselves, the class themselves. And I think it doesn't all hinge because they've got a great class already. But the rest of it could hinge on something we'll talk about, which is, what happens at quarterback. Can you get Deuce Knight? Do you guys feel like that's going to happen and go ahead and say, hey, I'm ready because they've got a feeling it's coming? That could impact this class dramatically over the course of the next few weeks and months. if you were to add a quarterback in, could it impact a guy like Shai Mills Knight? It could. But yeah, there's a lot of things that hinge on Deuce Knight and quarterback in the next couple of weeks, probably. For Auburn's 2025 class.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. And Deuce is what we'll talk about next. It's kind of, look, you've got the number 5 class in the country. You are in a great spot. You are right where Hugh Freeze wants you to be. If you get Deuce Knight, and if you can get some other dominoes to go your way, kind of correlating with Deuce, you could creep into trying to make the top 3.
2 or 3, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. You could get to that spot. And Deuce is kind of what that hinges on. And it's not necessarily – it's because, A, he's a very talented quarterback who's ranked very highly. He's a guy that a lot of people know about. And B, he's a quarterback. Everyone wants – the quarterback is always the leader of the recruiting class, no matter what it is.
Even defensive guys
go,
hey, I want to see who the quarterback is. It has that much of an impact because it's just a different position. And people think about, hey, what's this team going to look like? They think about potential quarterback down the road. It absolutely has an impact. And you're right. As we said, it could impact 3 or 4 more other guys potentially down the stretch for this team and for this class, and turn what's a solid top 5 class into potentially 2 or 3 down the road. And would be massive. And Christian, we talk about it almost every night. It still feels like Auburn's in a good spot for Deuce Knight, but it still feels like it's going to be closer to the end of the month before we find something out.
Yeah, I think it's just going to take a little bit of time. And it's hard for fans to be patient. It's hard for us who are on edge waiting for a Twitter notification or something like that, or getting a phone call and finding out some information. You're on edge a little bit, and especially in big time recruiting battles, because that's absolutely what this is. With Notre Dame is not letting him go easily. Ole Miss is the home state school, and they're fighting pretty hard as well. It's a big dog recruiting battle for Deuce Knight, but it's one that we think Auburn sits in a really good spot for. Last week, randomly, some rumors kind of popped up. Twitter smoke, if you want to call it. People were saying, oh, something could happen Tuesday. And people were saying, oh, something could happen Friday. That was nothing we had ever really heard, and nothing we reported for that matter. So there was never traction, at least on our end, from that perspective. We reported last week that we thought something could happen towards the end of the month. He opens his high school season on August 30th over there at George County. So, maybe leading into that week, something like that is possible. Jason, I think we both, my take would be, I think Auburn gets him by the end of the month. That's my personal opinion on where things stand because of a variety of factors, being closer to home. Obviously the receiving core that he would inherit at Auburn with guys like Cam Coleman, all the guys that you talked about earlier. Hugh Freeze, the development at quarterback. He even pointed out to Tom Loy, he said, look, he said Auburn has had a really good history of developing black quarterbacks at Auburn. That's what Deuce told Tom Loy. He said Cam Newton, Jason Campbell. Why am I drawing a blank? Nick Marshall.
Nick Marshall, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I think my personal take is that Auburn will have Deuce Knight in its class by the end of the month. Obviously, things can change, but that's my opinion right now, Jason. I don't know if you feel differently.
Yeah, I would lean towards Auburn at the moment. But it's recruiting. Things can change in a hurry. But I think, again, I said earlier, I think Auburn's in a good spot. But it feels like it's going to be still maybe a couple more weeks or 10 to 12 days before something happens. I do think that we'll find something out before maybe before his first game, which is 12 days away, 13 days away, maybe somewhere around in there. A lot of these guys want to get this thing done before they start their football season, to have it behind them so they can concentrate on trying to win a state championship. So that's what you start to feel like for a lot of these guys that are remaining, other than the ones that are like, I'm not close. You feel like if guys are close, that you'll learn something here. Then this next couple of weeks, we could see some dominoes fall, no matter who it is.
Yeah. Speaking of dominoes, one that I do think could play a factor with Deuce Knight, but it is obviously not the most important factor. There are a lot of other things going on there, but he is paying attention to what Deuce is going to end up doing. 5-star offensive tackle Andrew Babalola, Jason,
Yeah.
a guy that we have talked about extensively. From a national perspective, Auburn has been pretty consistently written off for most of the recruiting cycle. It was Auburn got an official visit, but from a national side, it was a lot of Michigan talk, a lot of Stanford talk. We've always kind of peppered in there, hey, Auburn thinks they're involved in this a lot more than some people think. And that's not to discredit other reports and other reporters, but for a while, Auburn felt like they weren't being talked about as much as maybe they should be in the Babalola recruitment. Now that's changed. Now everyone kind of recognizes Auburn is right there for Andrew Babalola. And we think that it's down to a 2-team race, honestly. Now, he hasn't come to any sort of decision yet. I know it had been floated out that he wanted to have a decision on August 12th once he starts his senior year out there in Kansas. He's still mulling through some things, but we think it's down to Auburn and Michigan. Now, you shouldn't necessarily count out Stanford because that's a team that had a lot of buzz in this recruitment for a long time. But we think it's Michigan, Auburn, and it's really close, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, Auburn has maintained contact. And again, we go back to class and the guys you're bringing in and how much of an impact that can have, because these guys are talking to other guys. And so, he's a guy that's getting some phone calls and texts from guys that are currently committed. And you look up and you go, and what's this thing going to look like for me beginning next year? Obviously, this year's important, but you go, hey, who am I going to be playing with? And that's a big deal. And so I think that has an impact. Auburn's class, the more guys you get, the more guys want to come. That's the way recruiting works. And I've been saying for years that recruiting in silence is a death knell, because you want to have as much publicity, as much notoriety, because kids want to be a part of it. And when they don't know that something exciting is happening, they ain't looking at you. Right now, kids are looking at Auburn because they're going, holy cow, look what they're doing. And that's how you build momentum recruiting. And if you can continue that over the next couple of weeks, then you're going to have a chance to get more top guys.
2 more names we should probably touch on real quick, and then we can wrap things up. Tyler Lockart, a guy who we've talked about pretty extensively since Big Cat Weekend. Felt like Auburn kind of recaptured the momentum in his recruitment at Big Cat Weekend. Still nothing has necessarily happened there. He's still open. Obviously, he reopened his recruitment in June after being committed to Auburn, but we feel like Auburn's in a spot where they could potentially get him back in the class. Kind of just wait and see there a little bit with Tyler Lockart. He's a really quiet kid, doesn't do a whole lot of interviews. When he does interview, he doesn't say a whole lot. He's just pretty quiet. So it's kind of a wait and see what happens. And we feel like Auburn's in a pretty good spot there.
Yeah, another one where you go okay, wait and see what happens when it happens. But again, I feel like it, again, before this season starts for him, I feel like we'll know something from Tyler Lockart. And that's another one where you go, Auburn is kept. We heard Alvin Henderson say, hey, consistent. They stay consistent. They kept recruiting. Tyler Lockart was in the class, backed off. Auburn stayed consistent, kept recruiting. He comes back and visits, and you go, okay, all right, they're still there. And so in the past, when a guy decommitted, you go, man, that you probably write that one off. This staff, they're recruiting other guys, but they're not throwing in the towel on guys that maybe even don't pick them the first time. And so I think that's a big deal. I think that consistency has been there, and that's what you better do. And you might not sign that guy in this class, but you might get him next year in the transfer portal. Don't burn any bridges. And I think this staff has done a good job of keeping lines of communication open no matter what happens. It may not pay off now, but it might pay off a year or two down the road when a guy's unhappy and is looking for his next home. And you go, hey, remember us. It's already paid off. What do you think about Charles Kelly with some of the guys he had recruited or coached, or some other guys Auburn had recruited, this staff, maybe other places? It's already shown up.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, building exactly what you just said, saying almost the exact same thing. Neem Alfred was the last guy that I wanted to talk about a little bit. It's the consistency that's been there for Auburn that has the minute. I mean, you go back to, he committed in February, and we're talking about him in March and April when he doesn't visit at all in spring practice. And we're saying, look, it's an extremely uphill battle. Auburn's going to try and chip away, but there's a lot of work to be done. Auburn has done that work. Auburn has chipped away at that lead that Ohio State has built. We think that Auburn sits, after he took his official visit. He returned with his team for 7-on-7 camp. He was back for Big Cat Weekend. Obviously, you've seen what Auburn has done in the state of Alabama with 8 of the top 10 guys currently committed in the 24/7 sports rankings. We feel like now Auburn's kind of right there with Ohio State. He's obviously committed to the Buckeyes, but we feel like Auburn sits in a spot where they're going to make it close, really close, down the final months of this recruitment.
Yeah, they've given themselves a legit shot, and that's what you got committed elsewhere. A guy like that, you go, hey, let's give ourselves a shot, and I think Auburn has continued to do that. Coach Crime, Charles Kelly, Durkin, Hugh Freeze, all those guys continue to make Neem Alfred a priority. I think that's a big deal. This in-state group, you mentioned it. I think that's the thing that this thing hinges on, because these guys have said, look, we want to, hey, everybody, let's go. And it's continued to roll that way. And Neem Alfred's a guy that all these kids from the in-state, all these guys that are committed to Auburn are going to continue to go, hey, don't leave us. We're here. I think that's going to play a role here. Will it be enough? I don't know. We'll see. But you're right. Auburn is absolutely going to have a shot.
Yeah, I think that's the last one that we'll talk about. Jason, in case we want to cover Shai Mills' night ceremony on Saturday, he's actually doing it back home in Canada. I just found out. So
probably not going to do that one. I don't think. So.
Might have to get the passport ready if we want to do that. But stay tuned at Auburn Undercover, because we will have coverage leading into that commitment on Saturday. We think I think it'll end up being close. Ole Miss is viewed as the favorite, but I do not think Auburn is going to go off quietly into the night on Saturday. So we'll see what happens there. I'm not saying Auburn's going to win it. I just think Auburn's going to make it interesting. So Jason, unless there's any other recruiting things, I mean, there's more we could talk about. Sam Turner, stuff like that. I'll mention Sam Turner because we had mentioned before that he had thrown out the idea of having a final decision on August 8th. He's still thinking through some things. Georgia Tech has not let him go easily. Auburn has continued to push really, really hard for him. And August 8th was kind of a, hey, I want to do it by this date, but wasn't necessarily set in stone. Think there could be a resolution with him by the end of the month, maybe by the first game of college season. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think there's a chance he could be back for the season opener and could maybe make a decision by then.
Yep. Yeah. Like there's still a few of those things that are still out there as well. And so a lot to look at. We'll be on the road this week. Georgia kicks off the high school football season. So we'll be on the road Friday night. So we'll have some stuff this weekend from actual real football games. It'll be a little warm, but looking forward to kicking it off. Alabama kicks off next week. So we've made it to football season, and we'll have some stuff rolling on Friday night.
Yeah, Buford Milton. Stay tuned for that. Luckily, I mean, you mentioned it'll be warm. It probably won't be as bad as last fall. That game in Arkansas was scorching hot.
Arkansas and our opener in Georgia last year too. Yeah, we had some warm ones. Yeah, I saw like right around 90, 89, 90, and low 70s for a low. So be okay.
Yeah, and I think it kicks off at 7:30, so we should be
not too bad.
Should be good there. Nathan is still backstage. I don't know if Nathan wanted to hop back in or if he's good. He's waving, so he's good. Oh, he's back.
I'm waving because I want to say hello.
All right.
No, I'm good. I don't have anything to add.
But I mean, I guess for us, make sure you guys are locked in tomorrow, because we have a lot of things coming tomorrow. We'll have all the defensive assistants, and we're going to have a couple of guys that are in charge of Auburn's equipment and coaching to talk about headsets, the tablets, all those things, the communication issue. So we'll have videos, some stories, all that thing. So tomorrow will be a really, really big day. Tomorrow afternoon, Wednesday afternoon. So make sure you're locked in, because we'll have a ton of stuff coming tomorrow afternoon.
Yep. Should be good. Yeah, I mean, I'm personally very interested to see.
It's gonna be really exciting to think about and to hear kind of the plans and how it's gonna be used.
Yeah. As I understand it, Saturday was their first time with the tablets. I didn't see Hugh Freeze launch one across the sideline like he threatened he might. So I guess it didn't go completely terribly. So. Alrighty. Well, we'll wrap things up. If you guys want to, appreciate everybody. We've been hovering pretty consistently around 100 plus viewers this entire time. So had a ton of comments going here. Not a lot on recruiting though, while you guys were talking, but we appreciate everybody for chatting and and tapping in on Facebook and on YouTube. And until the next time, we will catch you guys later.